The silk scarf around Tessa Price's neck hid more than just the jagged scar that stretched from ear to collarbone. It concealed a story of flames and screams from 8 years ago when, at 12, she watched her parents' brownstone engulf in fire. Now at 20, she navigated between tables at Fierezza, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Thunder cracked outside as the maitre d' directed her to a corner table where an elderly woman with silver hair waited alone, eyes fixed on the storm beyond the glass. Unlike other patrons who demanded attention with snaps and shouts, this woman's hands rested calmly on the white tablecloth. When Tessa approached with water, the woman turned, revealing eyes the color of weathered jade that seemed to hold decades of unspoken stories. She gestured toward the menu with elegant fingers, her mouth opening but producing no sound, confusion momentarily crossing her aristocratic features. Something in the woman's expression triggered a memory. Aunt Harriet teaching Tessa sign language after taking her in, those quiet nights learning to speak with hands instead of the voice smoke had temporarily stolen. Without hesitation, Tessa's fingers formed the words, "Welcome to Fierezza." The woman's face transformed from polite resignation to shock, then to a joy so bright it seemed to illuminate the dimly lit corner. Her hands moved rapidly in response. "You know Russian sign language? No one here has understood me in years." Their silent conversation flowed easily, as Tessa described the menu, occasionally pausing to brush away the unexpected tears forming in the corner of the woman's eyes. Through quick movements, the woman revealed her name, Irina, and explained she'd flown in from Moscow to visit her son. As they conversed, Irina confided that she'd lost her hearing during a bombing in Stalingrad while shielding her infant son with her body. Her fingers trembled slightly as she described how the explosion had taken her hearing but spared them both. The restaurant door crashed open, momentarily drowning out the thunder as a group of suited men entered, their presence commanding immediate attention from staff and patrons alike. At their center walked a tall figure, whose midnight blue suit couldn't quite conceal the predatory grace of his movements. Restaurant staff scrambled to attention, the manager appearing from nowhere to bow deeply before the man, whose face bore a thin scar running from temple to jawline. His cold eyes scanned the room with calculated precision, pausing briefly on each exit. Tessa instinctively stepped back, her hand tightening around her order pad as she recognized Nikolai Volkov, whose name was whispered in fear throughout New York's 5 boroughs. The Russian Mafia boss controlled half the city through a complex web of businesses, bribes, and blood. Volkov moved through the restaurant like a shark through shallow waters, other patrons shrinking away from his path. Yet his purposeful stride led directly to Irina's table, where he bent to kiss the silver-haired woman's cheek with unexpected tenderness. The contrast was jarring, this feared man showing such gentle deference to the elegant older woman. Tessa stepped back further, hoping to fade into the background, but Irina's hands moved quickly, gesturing toward her with obvious enthusiasm. Volkov's steel-gray eyes locked onto Tessa with laser focus, his expression unreadable as his mother's fingers flew, clearly explaining their interaction. The scar on his face seemed to deepen as his jaw tightened, watching their silent exchange. Irina's gestures became more animated, and Tessa caught fragments about first person in years, and understands me completely. The older woman's eyes sparkled with an almost childlike delight as she signed rapidly to her imposing son. Tessa could feel the weight of Volkov's stare as he assessed her, his eyes lingering momentarily on the scarf around her neck. Without warning, he pulled out a chair and gestured for Tessa to sit, his movement suggesting this was not a request but a command. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but the warm smile from Irina gave her courage. Tessa sank into the chair, wondering if her simple act of kindness had entangled her in something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. Volkov signaled to the manager, who rushed over with a bottle of vodka so expensive Tessa had only seen it behind locked glass. "My mother wishes you to join us," he stated, his accent giving each word a sharp edge like cut crystal. "I never deny her anything." Tessa's hands trembled slightly as she accepted a crystal glass filled with clear liquid. The restaurant's other servers shot her bewildered glances as she sat with Manhattan's most feared criminal and his mother, trapped between protocol and self-preservation. Irina's hands moved with elegant precision, sharing stories of her son's childhood, tales that contradicted everything Tessa had heard about the ruthless Nikolai Volkov. Through signs, the older woman described singing lullabies to her baby boy, even after losing her hearing. "She says you're the first person besides me who's understood her in years," Volkov translated unnecessarily, his voice surprisingly soft. Tessa nodded, watching his expression shift as his mother described memories he'd apparently never heard before. Irina's weathered fingers moved gracefully as she revealed how she would place her hands on her throat to feel the vibrations while singing to baby Nikolai. I couldn't hear my voice, but I felt every note inside my chest, she signed, her eyes bright with remembered joy. Volkov's face remained impassive, but Tessa noticed a muscle twitching in his jaw as his mother continued, sharing intimate memories that seemed to surprise him. His scarred knuckles whitened around his vodka glass as Irina signed about their escape from Russia. She never told me these stories, he said quietly, eyes never leaving his mother's hands. For 25 years we've lived in different worlds, hers silent, mine. He didn't finish, but the implication hung heavy between them. Through careful signs, Tessa asked Irina about her journey to America, offering simple questions that opened floodgates of memory. The older woman's face lit up with each response, clearly starved for communication that didn't require her son's interpretation. I've hired interpreters before, Volkov commented, watching their exchange with growing interest. She dismissed them all within days. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying Tessa with new calculation. Yet she speaks to you like an old friend. Irina's hands moved rapidly, explaining that interpreters felt clinical, formal. They translated words but missed emotions. This girl, she signed, nodding toward Tessa. She listens with her heart, not just her eyes. Lightning illuminated the restaurant as the storm intensified outside, casting harsh shadows across Volkov's scarred face. He leaned forward, the movement subtle, yet somehow threatening, like a predator adjusting position before a strike. Tell me, Miss Price, he said, the use of her name without introduction sending ice down her spine. How does a waitress at Fioretza come to know Russian Sign Language so fluently? His question carried the weight of suspicion beneath its casual delivery. Tessa hesitated, aware that her answer could determine far more than just this unusual dinner conversation. My aunt raised me after my parents died, she explained carefully. She was deaf, taught me to sign before I could properly speak again after the fire. Irina's expression softened with immediate empathy, her hands reaching across to squeeze Tessa's in silent understanding. The simple gesture of compassion nearly broke Tessa's careful composure, after years of keeping her tragedy locked away. Volkov watched this exchange with unnerving intensity, his eyes calculating even as his mother signed her sympathies. And the scarf? He asked bluntly, nodding toward her neck. Does it hide something from the same fire? Tessa's hand instinctively rose to the silk at her throat, the memory of flames and falling beams suddenly vivid after years of suppression. Yes, she answered simply, offering no further explanation as she fought to maintain her composure. Irina's hands flew in sharp, scolding movements directed at her son, her expression clearly chastising him for his insensitivity. Volkov accepted the rebuke with surprising grace, inclining his head slightly in acknowledgement of his mother's disapproval. Forgive my directness, he said, though his tone suggested the apology was merely a formality. We find ourselves in an unusual situation tonight. He glanced toward his mother, whose face had softened into an expression of quiet contentment as she watched their interaction. The storm had passed by the time they finished dinner, leaving behind a strange calm that seemed at odds with the tension coiled beneath Volkov's polite veneer. Tessa had answered his questions cautiously, revealing little beyond what simple courtesy demanded. Irina, however, had bloomed throughout the evening, her hands barely pausing as she shared decades of stories long locked away by her inability to communicate. Her joy was palpable, radiating across the table and softening even her son's hard edges. She hasn't been this animated in years, Volkov observed, watching his mother describe her childhood in pre-war Russia. His voice carried a note of wonder rarely heard by those who knew only his reputation for calculated violence. When Irina excused herself to the restroom, the air between Tessa and Volkov thickened immediately. My mother believes you're simply a kind waitress who happens to know her language, he stated, swirling amber liquid in his glass. I don't believe in such coincidences. Tessa met his gaze directly, refusing to show fear despite the threat implicit in his words. Sometimes kindness is just kindness, Mr. Volkov. She kept her voice steady, though her pulse hammered against her wrists. His laugh was unexpected, a short, harsh sound lacking any real humor. In my world, Miss Price, kindness always has a price tag. He leaned forward, the scar on his face catching the candlelight. What's yours? Before she could respond, Irina returned, immediately sensing the tension between them. Her hands questioned rapidly, concern etched across her elegant features as she looked from her son to Tessa with growing alarm. Volkov answered smoothly in sign language, his fingers moving with surprising grace for hands rumored to have ordered countless deaths. Whatever he told his mother seemed to satisfy her, though her eyes still held skepticism. The evening wound to its inevitable conclusion as Irina began showing signs of fatigue. Volkov signaled for the check, dismissing the manager's obsequious assurances that dinner was complimentary, with a cold stare that brooked no argument. As they prepared to leave, Irina took Tessa's hands in hers, signing with obvious emotion. "You've given me back my voice tonight." Her weathered fingers trembled slightly as she added, "Please, visit me. I have so few people to truly talk with." Volkov watched this exchange with unreadable eyes, his scarred face masking whatever thoughts passed behind his calculating gaze. "My mother rarely makes requests," he said quietly, "and I never deny her anything that brings her happiness." Tessa recognized the implicit command beneath his words, but found herself nodding anyway. Something about Irina's lonely dignity resonated deeply with her own isolated existence. Two women separated from the world around them by different forms of silence. The restaurant fell to hushed whispers as Volkov escorted his mother toward the door, his hand protective at her elbow. Before following them, he turned back to Tessa with startling swiftness, pressing a business card into her palm. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "My driver will collect you." His fingers brushed against her scarf with deliberate intent, a reminder of his earlier question. "We have much to discuss, Miss Price." After they departed, Tessa slipped into the employee bathroom, finally allowing her composed facade to crumble. She stared at her reflection, at the silk scarf hiding both physical and emotional scars, wondering if her simple act of kindness had just sealed her fate. The business card in her hand bore no company name, no title, only a phone number embossed in silver, and the initials NV pressed into thick black cardstock. It felt heavy in her palm, weighted with implications that stretched far beyond tomorrow's meeting. The black sedan arrived precisely at 2, its tinted windows reflecting Tessa's apprehensive expression as she approached. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with a military bearing, opened the rear door without speaking, his eyes scanning the street with practiced vigilance. Manhattan's elite skyline blurred outside the window as they crossed into areas Tessa rarely ventured, neighborhoods where Russian was spoken more commonly than English. Signs in Cyrillic decorated storefronts beneath imposing brownstones that housed businesses with suspiciously minimal customer traffic. The car finally stopped before a restored pre-war building whose elegant facade belied the armed guards positioned discreetly at its entrance. Tessa was escorted through a marble lobby to a private elevator requiring both a keycard and fingerprint scan. Volkov awaited her in a penthouse office more suited to a Fortune 500 CEO than a Mafia boss. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city he controlled, while priceless artwork adorned walls that had likely witnessed countless illegal negotiations. "My mother hasn't stopped talking about you," he said without preamble, gesturing toward an antique chair across from his desk. "She's requested you join us for dinner twice weekly to continue your conversations." Tessa remained standing, summoning courage she didn't know she possessed. "Mr. Volkov, I'm flattered by your mother's interest, but I need to understand what this arrangement truly involves." Her voice remained remarkably steady despite her racing heart. His expression darkened momentarily before settling into calculated neutrality. "Normally, I investigate anyone who comes near my family with exhaustive thoroughness." He tapped a manila folder on his desk. "With you, I find myself in an unusual position." The folder contained photographs of Tessa throughout the years, at her aunt's funeral, entering community college, even walking to work. "Your background check shows nothing suspicious, yet something doesn't add up." He studied her reaction with predatory focus. Before Tessa could respond, his phone rang with a distinctive tone that immediately changed his demeanor. Answering in rapid Russian, Volkov's expression hardened into something dangerous as he barked orders to the person on the other end. He hung up and fixed Tessa with a penetrating stare. "It seems our meeting must be cut short. There's a situation requiring my attention." He moved toward a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a small arsenal of weapons. As he selected a matte black handgun, the door burst open and a lieutenant rushed in, breathlessly delivering news in hushed Russian. Volkov's reaction was immediate, his entire body tensing like a coiled spring as his eyes darted to Tessa with new calculation. "The Barzini family has just put out a contract on you," he stated flatly, checking the gun's magazine with practiced efficiency. "They believe you're an undercover federal agent, placed at Firenze to gather intelligence on their operations." Tessa's knees weakened as the room seemed to tilt around her. "There must be a mistake," she stammered, clutching the back of the chair for support. "I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything about any Barzini family." Volkov's laugh held no humor as he holstered the weapon beneath his tailored jacket. "Whether you know them is irrelevant. They believe they know you." His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "The question is why they think an ordinary waitress is FBI." Before she could process this revelation, Volkov issued rapid commands to his lieutenant, who immediately spoke into his radio. "You'll be coming with me," Volkov informed her, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request, but a statement of fact. The building's private garage contained a collection of luxury vehicles that would make any car enthusiast weep. German engineering, Italian artistry, and American muscle arranged in perfect formation. Volkov selected an armored SUV with tinted windows, practical rather than flashy. A sleek black cat darted between vehicles as they approached, earning a rare smile from Volkov, who paused momentarily to watch its graceful exit. "Building security," he commented, noticing Tessa's questioning look. "Better than cameras. They notice everything and belong to no one." Sunlight briefly pierced through threatening storm clouds as they emerged onto the street, illuminating pedestrians who instinctively moved aside. Upon recognizing Volkov's vehicle, the invisible bubble of fear surrounding him extended even to strangers, who couldn't see the man behind the tinted glass. Tessa watched her familiar neighborhood disappear in the side mirror, the coffee shop where she bought breakfast each morning, the bookstore whose owner saved poetry collections for her, the park where she sometimes sketched on her days off, all receding into a life that suddenly felt like someone else's memory. Within minutes, Tessa found herself ushered back to the elevator, surrounded by armed guards whose expressions suggested they expected an attack at any moment. The simple dinner invitation had somehow catapulted her into the center of a Mafia war. Volkov's safe house proved to be a fortress, disguised as a luxury estate in the Hamptons, its perimeter secured by both technology and armed men, positioned throughout the sprawling grounds. Tessa watched waves crash against private shoreline from a bedroom window that, despite its beautiful view, couldn't disguise the fact that she was essentially a prisoner. 3 days passed in surreal isolation, with only house staff and security personnel for company until Irina arrived, her face lighting up at the sight of Tessa. Their conversations flowed easily through sign language, providing welcome distraction from the armed guards constantly patrolling outside. On the 4th evening, Volkov finally returned, his designer suit exchanged for casual attire that somehow made him look even more dangerous. "I've discovered why the Barzinis targeted you," he announced without greeting, pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch. He produced an old newspaper clipping featuring a family photo, a man, woman, and 2 young girls standing before a brownstone. Tessa's breath caught as she recognized her parents, herself, and her younger sister in the grainy image taken just weeks before the fire. "Your father wasn't just an accountant. He handled books for both our organization and the Barzinis," Volkov explained, watching her reaction carefully. "The fire that killed your parents wasn't an accident. It was ordered by Giuseppe Barzini when he suspected your father of skimming." The room seemed to spin around Tessa as decades-old truths shattered her understanding of her past. "My sister," she whispered, fingers tracing the image of the smiling 8-year-old beside her younger self. "They told me she died too." Volkov's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "That's where things get interesting," he said quietly, placing another photo on the table, a recent surveillance image of a young woman whose features echoed Tessa's own. "She's alive, working as a bookkeeper for the Barzini family." "That's impossible," Tessa breathed, though the resemblance was undeniable. The woman had their mother's eyes, their father's distinctive nose, features Tessa saw daily in her own reflection. "Why would they take her but not me?" Volkov studied her with calculating eyes. "Insurance," he stated flatly. "Your father kept records on both families. The Barzinis needed leverage to ensure those records never surfaced." He swirled amber liquid in his glass. "They've kept her close for 12 years. Outside the window, seagulls circled above the private beach, their cries punctuating the silence between Tessa and Volkov. The contrast between the peaceful coastal setting and the violent undercurrents of their conversation created a dissonance that made everything seem slightly surreal. A framed photograph on the bookshelf caught Tessa's attention, a much younger Irina holding an infant Nikolai, her smile radiant despite the tension evident in her posture. The image humanized the feared crime boss in a way that made Tessa's situation even more complex. The security system chimed softly, announcing a perimeter check as armed guards completed another sweep of the property. Tessa had noticed their rotations grew more frequent as darkness fell, suggesting Volkov anticipated potential threats even in this secluded location. Volkov's phone lit up with an encrypted message that drew his attention momentarily, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly as he read the content. "Your sister was moved to their Manhattan property yesterday," he noted, sliding the device back into his pocket. "That's both concerning and useful information." The revelation struck like a physical blow, forcing the air from Tessa's lungs as fragments of memory rearranged themselves. She remembered screaming for her sister, as Aunt Harriet pulled her from the burning building, remembered being told days later that searchers had found remains. "We've been monitoring her for the past 2 days," Volkov continued, producing more photos showing her sister entering various Barzini businesses. "From what we can gather, she has some form of chronic illness. They keep her dependent on medications they control." Tessa's hands trembled as she sorted through the surveillance photos, drinking in details of the sister she'd mourned for 12 years. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked finally, looking up to meet Volkov's unreadable gaze. "What do you want from me?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The same thing I suspect you want now. Access to your sister." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "Our interests have become temporarily aligned, Miss Price. The Barzinis have something you want, and I want something from the Barzinis." "And what exactly is that?" Tessa asked, though she already suspected the answer from the coldness in his eyes. Volkov had built his empire through calculated violence. This sudden alignment of interests wouldn't have a peaceful resolution. "Justice," he replied simply, though the word carried ominous weight. "They've moved against my family by targeting someone under my protection." His fingers brushed against his scar unconsciously. Such disrespect cannot go unanswered. The implications of his words hung heavy between them. Tessa had become an unwitting pawn in a dangerous game between rival crime families. Yet the knowledge that her sister lived changed everything, transforming impossible choices into necessary risks. Irina proved to be an unexpected ally in the strange new reality Tessa found herself trapped within. The older woman's joy at having someone fluent in her language soon evolved into something deeper, a maternal protectiveness that manifested in daily visits to the safe house. "My son believes everyone has hidden motives," Irina signed during one afternoon session, her weathered hands moving with elegant precision. "But I've lived long enough to recognize genuine kindness when I see it." Her eyes, so similar to her son's yet infinitely warmer, studied Tessa with understanding. Tessa had expected to feel like a captive, but Irina's presence transformed her confinement into something closer to sanctuary. Their conversations ranged from mundane to profound, building a connection that transcended their unusual circumstances. One evening, Irina arrived with an unexpected request, her hands forming signs Tessa didn't immediately recognize. "These are Russian military signs," the older woman explained, demonstrating again with deliberate slowness, different from standard Russian sign language, used by special forces during covert operations. "Why would I need to know military signs?" Tessa asked, confusion evident in her own gestures. Irina's expression grew serious as she glanced toward the door to ensure their privacy before responding. Her answer was startling in its directness. "Because in this world, my son's world, information is both weapon and shield." Her fingers moved with new urgency. "If you and I can communicate in ways others cannot understand, we both gain protection." The revelation that Irina had once been involved with Soviet intelligence added another layer to the complex family Tessa had become entangled with. "Before I lost my hearing, I worked for people who valued my ability to observe and remember details," Irina signed, her expression revealing nothing of the dangers such work must have entailed. They practiced for hours, Irina proving to be a demanding teacher despite her gentle demeanor. The military signs were sharper, more concise than conventional signing, designed to convey critical information with minimal movement that could be detected by enemies. Volkov discovered them during one such session, watching from the doorway with unreadable eyes before entering with uncharacteristic hesitancy. "I remember these," he said softly, his gaze fixed on his mother's hands. "You used these with father when you didn't want me to understand." Irina's expression softened as she signed directly to her son. "I used them to protect you." She gestured for him to join them, patting the sofa beside her with maternal authority that even the feared Mafia boss didn't challenge. The grandfather clock in the corner marked the passing hours with solemn chimes that seemed to remind everyone of time's relentless march. Tessa noticed how Irina glanced at it occasionally, with a wistfulness that suggested she was counting more than just hours. Bookshelves lined the library walls, filled with volumes in multiple languages: Russian, English, French, and others Tessa couldn't identify. Many showed signs of frequent handling, their spines cracked from repeated reading during Irina's decades of isolated silence. A chess set carved from ivory and ebony sat on a side table, a game apparently abandoned mid-play with pieces frozen in strategic positions. Volkov noticed Tessa's glance and explained quietly, "We've had the same game going for 3 years. Mother always beats me, but I make her work for it." Rain began to patter against the windows, creating a soothing backdrop to their lesson as evening deepened into night. The soft lighting cast shadows across the room, somehow making this bizarre situation, sign language lessons with a Mafia boss and his mother, feel almost normal. To Tessa's surprise, Volkov settled beside his mother, his scarred hands awkwardly attempting to mimic the signs they practiced. The contrast between his reputation and this moment of vulnerability was jarring, his fingers stumbling over movements that required finesse rather than force. "My father forbade me from learning," he explained, catching Tessa's questioning look. He considered signing a weakness, said his son would command respect through words spoken aloud, not waving hands like a mute. The old pain in his voice was raw, unexpected. Irina's face darkened at the mention of her late husband, her hands moving in sharp, angry gestures that needed no translation. Volkov nodded grimly in agreement before turning to Tessa with unexpected directness. "Teach me," he requested. The command in his voice softened to something almost like asking. "I've spent 29 years speaking to my mother through interpreters or limited signs I taught myself in secret." His eyes held a vulnerability she'd never expected to see. "I want to truly talk with her before it's too late." The nightly lessons became a strange ritual. The 3 of them gathered in the library after dinner, Tessa guiding Volkov's hands into proper positions, while Irina beamed with undisguised joy. In these moments, the dangerous Mafia boss transformed into simply a son eager to connect with his mother. During one session, Volkov's sleeve rode up, revealing burn scars encircling his wrist. Catching Tessa's glance, he stated flatly, "My father caught me practicing signs when I was 12. His expression hardened with memory. He believed pain was an effective teacher. 2 weeks passed in this strange arrangement, with Tessa balancing sign language lessons by day and secret planning sessions by night as Volkov prepared for an inevitable confrontation with the Barzini family. The tension in the safe house grew palpable as reports arrived daily of escalating violence between the rival organizations. Phone calls in hushed Russian became more frequent, with Volkov disappearing for hours, only to return with fresh bruises or blood on his cuffs. Yet each evening, he would sit beside his mother with surprising gentleness, his scarred hands forming increasingly fluid signs as Tessa guided his progress. The fragile peace shattered one morning when Tessa's bedroom door burst open, revealing Volkov with an expression she'd never seen before, something beyond anger, closer to barely contained panic. "Get dressed," he ordered, tossing a bulletproof vest onto her bed. "We need to move you immediately." Intelligence had arrived overnight that the Barzinis had discovered her location and planned a raid on the safe house within hours. As security personnel rushed to evacuate Irina to a secondary location, Volkov pulled Tessa into his private study, locking the door behind them. "There's something you need to know," he stated, retrieving a hidden tablet from behind a bookshelf. "We've confirmed your sister's condition. She has a rare autoimmune disease requiring specialized treatment." He displayed medical records obtained through methods Tessa didn't want to contemplate. The documents showed years of carefully controlled medication, administered exclusively by Barzini's personal physician, a medical prison ensuring her sister's compliance and dependence. "Without proper treatment, she has perhaps 3 months, Volkov added, his tone clinically detached. His next revelation hit like a physical blow. "The FBI contacted me this morning. He produced a recording of a conversation with a federal agent named Harlow. They've been watching both families for years, building RICO cases against everyone involved. Agent Harlow's offer was deceptively simple: full immunity for Tessa and extraction of her sister in exchange for information on both crime families. They know about your connection to me now," Volkov explained, studying her reaction with unnerving intensity. "Why are you telling me this?" Tessa asked, though the answer was already forming in her mind with sickening clarity. You could have simply eliminated the problem. They both knew she meant herself, a loose end easily cut by a man with Volkov's resources. His response was unexpected, a bark of laughter that held no humor. "My mother would never forgive me," he said simply. though his eyes revealed more complex calculations. Besides, I find myself curious about what you'll choose. The impossible decision crystallized before her. Betray the man who had protected her, and possibly save her sister, or remain loyal, and watch her only family die from neglect. What about you? She asked finally. What happens to you if I cooperate with the FBI? Volkov shrugged with deceptive casualness. 20 years minimum, possibly life. His expression remained unreadable. The question is whether your sister's life is worth my freedom. A calculation only you can make. His phone buzzed with an incoming message that changed everything. Time to go, he announced, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. The Barzinis moved faster than expected. We need to reach the secondary safe house before they close all routes. They escaped through an underground garage, switching vehicles twice before reaching a heavily fortified waterfront property in Connecticut. As armed guards secured the perimeter, Volkov received another call that drained the color from his face. Your sister has been moved, he informed Tessa after a terse conversation in Russian. The Barzinis are accelerating their timetable. Whatever they've planned, it's happening within 48 hours. He studied her with calculating eyes. Which means we need to finalize your decision now. The weight of impossible choices pressed down on Tessa as she stared out at Long Island Sound, her reflection in the window overlaying the darkening water. Behind her stood Volkov, the scarred enforcer of deadly consequence. Before her lay a future determined by whichever betrayal she chose to commit. Agent Harlow arrived at sunset, her government-issue sedan incongruous among the luxury vehicles in the driveway. Her handshake was firm, her eyes evaluating everything as Volkov permitted her entry with obvious reluctance. I need Miss Price's answer, she stated, without preamble. The federal agent laid out photographs of Tessa's sister, recent images showing alarming weight loss, and the telltale rash of her condition spreading across her neck. She's deteriorating rapidly, Harlow confirmed. Without intervention, our medical experts give her weeks, not months. Tessa listened to the immunity offer with growing numbness, each word another weight on her conscience as Volkov watched silently from across the room. The choice before her wasn't just about survival anymore, it had become about what kind of survivor she would be. The morning of the summit between families dawned with ominous gray skies mirroring the tension that had settled over the Connecticut safe house. Tessa had barely slept, her decision weighing heavily as she prepared for what would likely be the most dangerous day of her life. Volkov entered her room without knocking, his expression unreadable as he placed a small tracking device and miniature earpiece on her dresser. For your protection, he explained, though they both understood it was equally about ensuring her compliance with whatever plan he had orchestrated. The meeting is set for noon at the plaza, he continued, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced precision. Both families, neutral territory, limited security. His eyes met hers in the mirror. Whatever you've decided, remember that the Barzinis will kill you regardless of any agreement. As they prepared to leave, Irina appeared unexpectedly, her silver hair elegantly styled despite the early hour. She embraced Tessa with maternal warmth, before signing rapidly in the military code they'd practiced. Messages Volkov couldn't fully understand, despite his lessons. The ride into Manhattan passed in tense silence, broken only by occasional updates through Volkov's earpiece as his men reported on Barzini movements throughout the city. Tessa watched familiar streets blur past, wondering if she would live to see another New York sunset. The plaza's private dining room had been secured and swept by both families' security teams, resulting in an atmosphere of carefully balanced hostility as bodyguards from rival organizations eyed each other across the ornate space. At the center, two tables faced each other with deliberate symbolism, separate but equal powers preparing for negotiation. Giuseppe Barzini proved to be nothing like Tessa had imagined. Not a towering figure of evil, but an elderly man with kindly eyes that contradicted his reputation for ruthless efficiency. His smile upon seeing her sent chills down her spine, the grandfatherly demeanor masking the man who had ordered her parents' murder. So this is the lost daughter, Barzini remarked in accented English, studying her with unconcealed interest. You look remarkably like your mother. The casual reference to the woman he had killed struck Tessa like a physical blow, though she maintained her composure. The meeting began with formal declarations of grievances, territorial disputes, accusations of disrespect, and finally, the matter of Tessa herself. You harbor a federal informant, Barzini stated flatly, addressing Volkov with cold certainty. This cannot stand between our families. Volkov's response was measured, his scarred face betraying nothing, as he countered with evidence of Barzini interference in his operations. The choreographed exchange of accusations continued, while Tessa observed the power dynamics at play, noting which lieutenants carried concealed weapons despite the no firearms agreement. When her moment came, Tessa stepped forward with practiced confidence that belied her racing heart. "I believe I can resolve this misunderstanding," she stated clearly, placing 3 manila folders on the table between the crime lords. These contain information relevant to both families. The room fell silent as Barzini and Volkov each opened their designated folders, expressions shifting from curiosity to carefully controlled alarm as they reviewed the contents. The third folder remained closed, its presence a silent threat between them. "That folder contains evidence against both organizations," Tessa explained calmly. "Financial records, witness statements, photographic evidence, everything the FBI needs for RICO convictions." She allowed this to sink in before continuing. "It will be delivered to federal prosecutors unless 3 conditions are met." Her demands were simple yet audacious. Her sister's immediate release with all necessary medical information, cessation of hostilities between families, and complete immunity for herself from any future retaliation. In exchange, the evidence disappears permanently. Barzini's elderly facade cracked, revealing the ruthless criminal beneath as he signaled to his nearest guard. "Kill her," he ordered simply, seeing no need for further negotiation, when elimination would solve the problem more efficiently. The room erupted in sudden movement as weapons appeared despite security protocols, but before anyone could fire, the service door swung open to reveal Irina Volkova, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier light as she walked calmly into the center of potential carnage. Volkov's shock at his mother's appearance was genuine, his protective instincts immediately overriding strategic concerns as he moved to shield her from the gathered weapons. "Mother, you shouldn't be here," he signed rapidly, forgetting in his alarm that others might not understand. Irina's response came in military signs, quick, efficient gestures that only Tessa and partially Volkov could comprehend. "The third folder is a decoy," she signed. "The real evidence has been with my attorneys for decades. Insurance against exactly this scenario." 6 months after the confrontation at the plaza, Manhattan's criminal landscape had shifted dramatically with the tentative peace between Volkov and Barzini families, holding despite skepticism from both organizations. The agreement, born from mutual destruction rather than trust, remained fragile but effective. Tessa's sister, Catherine, had been released as promised, her medical treatment now supervised by specialists at Mount Sinai, who marveled at her resilience after years of controlled illness. The sisters spent weeks relearning each other, bridging 12 years of separation with cautious steps toward rebuilding their fractured family. The most surprising transformation came from Nikolai Volkov himself, who began the careful process of legitimizing portions of his business empire in exchange for limited cooperation with federal authorities. While far from reformed, his priorities had shifted subtly, but significantly away from expansion toward preservation. Fiorezza restaurant changed ownership, purchased through an anonymous holding company that renovated the space into a community center for deaf children and survivors of violence. The elegant dining room where everything began now hosted support groups and language classes rather than Manhattan's elite. Irina flourished in her new role as the center's patroness. Her decades of isolation finally ended as she taught Russian Sign Language to eager students 3 days each week. The years seemed to fall away from her face as she found purpose beyond the gilded cage of her son's protection. Catherine's recovery progressed steadily, though doctors warned that years of medical manipulation had caused permanent damage that would require lifelong management. Still, she approached each day with quiet determination, learning sign language alongside her treatment to better communicate with Irina and the center's children. The sisters established a modest apartment above the center, creating a home filled with photographs of their parents and recovered mementos from their childhood brownstone. The space became a sanctuary, where they could rebuild their relationship away from the shadows that had separated them for so long. Agent Harlow maintained regular contact, her initial suspicion of Tessa's choices gradually evolving into reluctant respect for the delicate peace she had helped engineer. While the FBI continued building cases against both families, they honored the agreement to leave the Price sisters outside their investigations. Volkov visited the center each Sunday evening after closing, arriving without entourage or pretense to share private dinners with his mother, Tessa, and occasionally Catherine when her health permitted. These quiet gatherings existed outside the brutal realities of his daily life, moments of normalcy he seemed to treasure despite never acknowledging their importance. During one such dinner, Irina produced faded photographs of her own childhood in pre-war Russia, treasures she had kept hidden for decades for fear they would be destroyed by her late husband. As she shared stories of her family, Volkov listened with rare openness, his scarred hands occasionally forming questions in the language he once had been forbidden to use. The most profound changes happened in these small moments, not dramatic transformations, but subtle shifts toward connection after lifetimes of isolation. Catherine learning to trust after years of captivity, Irina finding voice after decades of silence, Volkov glimpsing possibilities beyond the violent legacy he had inherited. On Catherine's birthday, 6 months to the day after her release, Volkov arrived with an unexpected gift, documentation for a medical trust established in her name, ensuring her treatment regardless of what might happen to any of them in the future. The gesture acknowledged dangerous realities, while offering protection against them. Typical of the complex man he remained, the trust came with ownership shares in the community center, effectively placing the building's future in the sisters' hands, regardless of shifts in criminal alliances or federal investigations. Some debts can never truly be repaid, Volkov stated simply when Tessa questioned his motivations. But acknowledgement is a beginning. Spring brought tentative new beginnings as Catherine's strength improved enough for her to begin working part-time with the center's accounting. Her financial skills, ironically developed during her years with the Barzini family, now serving a purpose that honored rather than exploited her father's legacy. Tessa found unexpected purpose in developing programs for children traumatized by violence, her own experiences informing approaches that traditional therapies often overlooked. The scarf around her neck gradually became less about hiding her scars than a personal choice, the need for concealment diminishing as she reclaimed her story. One evening as they closed the center, Volkov arrived earlier than usual, tension evident in his controlled movements. "There's been a development," he explained tersely, escorting them to his car rather than their usual dining room. "The Barzini underboss is making moves against Giuseppe, challenging the peace agreement." The carefully constructed stability they'd built suddenly seemed fragile, as Volkov outlined contingency plans for their protection. Yet in this moment of renewed threat, Tessa noticed something remarkable. Volkov signing crucial details to ensure his mother fully understood, Catherine asking clarifying questions without fear, all of them facing danger as a unit rather than isolated individuals. What had begun with a simple act of kindness toward a deaf woman had somehow forged connections strong enough to withstand the storms gathering around them. As Volkov outlined security measures, Irina reached across to squeeze Tessa's hand, signing discreetly, "Some families are born, others are chosen through fire. Ours is stronger for how it was forged." The future remained uncertain, balanced precariously between criminal underworlds and legitimate aspirations. Yet something fundamental had shifted for each of them, the discovery that even in the darkest circumstances, connection could provide light enough to navigate by. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Where in the world are you watching from? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with friends who appreciate stories about unexpected connections and second chances. Your support means everything and helps us continue bringing powerful stories like this to life. Remember, in life as in our story, sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in the most unexpected places.